Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion for the afternoon. So if you're just hitting your lunch hour, get your bevies ready and your packed lunch, eat quietly in the background whilst we talk, and you just enjoy the rest of it. I'm going to start today with this conversation on design by difference by introducing or letting everybody introduce themselves. So I'll start with Stuart. If you can introduce yourself, please, sir.
Hi there, thanks Graham. Yeah, I'm Stuart Marsden. I'm a product manager at Claro Software, so making software for neurodiverse people at the moment. And I've been involved in assistive technology for nearly 2 decades.
And Rachel.
Hello, I'm Rachel Morgan Trimmer. I'm a neurodiversity consultant, which means I train people on neurodiverse inclusion, and I train neurodiverse people themselves on things like communication, time management, and so on. I'm autistic, I've got ADHD, I'm middle-aged, middle class, and my personal style could probably best be described as good God woman. It's not 1995 anymore. I've written a book, How to Treat Autistic People. I'm used to Zoom, we're on something else. How to Treat Autistic People is a book I made. I've also made this poster, How to Treat Autistic People, which won an award.
That's fantastic. I think we all could do with that poster. Thank you. Nicola James.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicola. I'm the founder of Lexic, and my background is a chartered psychologist with postgrad in neuropsychology. I'm just passionate about neurodiversity, and I'm really pleased with how the movement is going, and it's great to see people go on their journey and find strategies to help them.
Deborah.
Hi, I'm Deborah. I'm the neurodiversity lead at Dyslexia Box. We're a supplier of assistive technology, strategy coaching and training. I have a background as a workplace assessor and strategy coach, and also a research background, a PhD in inclusive practice in the context of performer training and professional practice.
And last but not least, Matthew.
Hiya, I'm Matthew Head. My day job is a senior design engineer for a company that develops race cars and high performance cars. But my side sort of job is running a website called Dyslexia Life Hacks that also has a podcast, the Dyslexia Life Hacks show on it. Being a lifelong dyslexic and being stagnated since I was 6, I've designed a website that's basically for the younger me to find hacks, tips and tricks and share best practices between people.
Now, when I asked everyone to come on this panel, I mentioned the word design, and I know from speaking to Deborah yesterday that there was a slight panic from some people thinking, well, actually design may mean that we're talking about creative design in terms of drawings or anything like that, but actually this is a broad scope. We're talking about design in any remit here today. So can you start by telling us, folks, how have you designed something? I mean, Rachel, you're probably going to talk to us about your poster. I don't know, maybe it's something else. But can you talk to us about something you've designed and talk us through the process in terms of how you design that for the neurodiverse?
Who first?
I'm thinking who first. I'm going to start with Rachel, I think.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about my book and my poster, but actually those weren't designed for neurodiverse people. This was, the book, sorry, was designed for people who are neurotypical, to learn how to treat autistic people. It's actually, I don't know how well you can see the poster, but the poster is the same content as the book, and it's basically just a joke. The book is one joke spread over 24 pages. And I think that's part of the design process I use in all my work, because what I was going to focus on in this panel today is more about how I design my training courses and my talks. Right. Because I talk to so many neurodiverse people, and I use humor an awful lot, because so many of the people I talk to have experienced isolation, they've experienced great difficulty, they've experienced shame and judgment, embarrassment. Lots of neurodiverse people have mental health issues, depression, anxiety, coexisting disorders such as addiction, eating disorders, all sorts of stuff. And some of those things can be really hard to talk about. Yeah. So one way I do that and get people engaged is by using humor. And I think people learn better when you use humor as well. It relaxes people. They're in a better frame of mind to start learning things. And one thing I wanted to mention when it comes to the training and talks and things like that is that something that's always overlooked in a lot of training sessions and presentations and so on is things like, we think about dyslexia and how easy something is to read or write or whatever, but we miss context and we miss attention. Now, I've got ADHD. My ADHD has fluctuated throughout my life. Well, it's always the same, but sometimes it's worse than others. And right now, because I have so much going on, it's quite bad. I've got the attention span of a gnat, and no one thinks about that when it comes to training or when it comes to talks or when it comes to webinars. So I really struggle to sit through them, and I find that people don't consider the fact that if someone's got a short attention span, you need to have tools and techniques and interactive activities and things like that to engage people. So when I do my training, I try and make it as interactive and engaging as possible. I've got this Dalek, for example. So I actually use that in the context of, like, it makes sense in the actual training about how people can be aggressive. But I use it because if people with ADHD or people who are just tired, didn't get a good night's sleep, or if people are thinking about something else in the training, I start doing this and suddenly everyone wakes up and they're engaged again. It's true though.
Might get myself one of those for the webinars.
So yeah, in short, really, my design is how I design my written communication and my verbal communication, my presentations. I try and use a variety of things to make it engaging and to have that context and that meaning and to make it interesting so that people can actually listen.
Thank you. Does anyone want to pick up on the point about attention span there with design of a product? Who wants to go?
I think
go ahead, Nicola. Yeah.
I'd say it's lovely that you do that, Rachel. I mean, particularly being dyslexic myself, it's really important to try and engage a multisensory environment. And when you're on Zoom or during COVID, it was harder to do that over that medium. So that's a great idea. And well done on your book.
Yeah, I'll have to find myself a copy as well. Yeah.
Stuart, talk to us about design of software and holding people's attention span in that.
For me, I'm neurotypical, I think, is a label that I might apply to myself. I've never had a diagnosis anyway of anything. My wife might chuckle if I call myself typical in any way, but she makes the joke that I've got a toe on the spectrum. I don't even know what that means, certainly in terms of the clinical definitions of things. But I think when I'm making something for someone else, the biggest challenge I have is getting out of my own head and not designing it for me. Like assuming that the thing I'm making and the solution I come up with, the way that it solves the problem for me, therefore other people will be happy with that solution, right? And that's with neurodiversity in mind. When I can't fully empathize with someone with ADHD or someone with certain mental health conditions and combinations of those things, I can't do that on my own. So I think Rachel mentioned sort of engagement, and that's what's really key for me, is actually bringing people into the design process and asking them those open questions and letting them take some responsibility or ownership of the design itself. So I'm not just sort of relying on my own opinion. That's the biggest challenge I have, I think. Yeah. Oh, I think you're on mute there, Graham.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. What about you, Deborah?
I guess just following on from Stuart, really, I was kind of going to talk about some coaching practice that I designed as part of my PhD, which was kind of specifically to meet the needs of actors and performers who had a specific learning difference like dyslexia or dyspraxia. And I guess in terms of that design process, it really did start with them, with the kind of the end user in mind. In this sense, it was the actors, and so that involved a series of focus groups and workshops, really trying to tease apart what their experiences were. So not just about, I guess, their telling me about their experience, but more, I guess, their sensory experience of things, and also trying to understand what was their ideal outcome. So what did they want out of the coaching? What did it look like, kind of thing. And what were the specific challenges related to their job role, which was, different to other job roles. So for example, someone that works in an office, the dyslexia may come out in different ways than, when you're needing to kind of sight read or learn lines in quite a short space of time. So it was sort of about breaking down the different parts of that process. So what were the cognitive challenges for them, in the context of having to read a play at short notice, or, having literally 10 minutes to prepare a piece of text that you've never read before, or have 24 hours to learn a piece of text. So it was looking at, what dyslexia friendly strategies could we apply? And those strategies are very kind of, if you like, commonly used in kind of workplace strategy coaching or study skills, but they're maybe not kind of fed through to, let's say, acting coaches. So there was a kind of gap between actors with a neurodiversity who were maybe seeing an acting coach, but they weren't necessarily working on those cognitive skills that they needed to kind of improve those skills. And then it was, looking at things like, well, how can you improve the line learning in terms of looking at multisensory learning, or, which is exactly the same as Rachel and Nicola have both mentioned. And also as part of that, improving concentration in order to learn. And also strategies to look at how do you improve sight reading, and those sorts of things.
Nicola, I know you've been involved in producing content for people around things like how to use Word and stuff like that in an effective way in the past, and you've produced online resources. How was it? How did you look at producing something that was different from everything else that was on the internet?
I think, with the e-learning, when we designed Neurotalent, a lot of the e-learning, there wasn't actually much out there, because I'd gone to the States and I was following the theme of what was going on in the States that hadn't really kicked off here. But I think when it comes to the question of design, I think before I founded and sort of designed Lexic, I had to design myself into a life that aligned with my strengths and my passion. And that's actually one of the hardest things that I had to do on my journey, because I struggled through academia and I had to work really hard, but I got to the point where I was exhausted. So I had to actually admit what I wasn't good at. And so, I had to actually go, first of all, these are the things I'm good at, but these are the things that I can't do. And I'll never find easier. I can use assistive technology to help me, but I still find proofreading hard. I find reading very labor intensive, but I have 1,000 ideas a minute. And then what I started to do is I started to get work, and then I had to ask for help. And asking for help when you're vulnerable with the things that you find difficult is really, it's hard. So I had to design an environment that works for me. So one of the first things I did is setting up a company allowed me to work for myself and do the things that I was good at. And then I started to use associates. I started to use people that maybe worked for me a couple of hours a week so that I could afford them to do the stuff that I found more challenging, which might be involve some of the proofreading or some of the more detailed work. And then as I gradually grew, if you actually look at the early days of Lexic, the design of the type of person I'm recruiting is very much different from me, because quite a lot of occupational psychologists are quite detailed, are quite into the detail. And so if I think of my first employee, he's coming up to 10 years, Vicky Cars, I was up in the clouds thinking of all these ideas, and she was there in the detail, managing people with a beautiful heart. And together it worked, because I would be like, let's do all this design content, let's create this stuff. And then she would help pull it together, and she would help get my ideas that maybe I verbally articulated down into a linear format. But then we realized that we need more help, because the scripts we'd written were very academic, so we needed a script writer to make them come alive. Otherwise it was very 2D on screen and not neurodiversity accessible. So I think one of the classics around designing yourself is admitting what you're passionate about and going for it, even though you don't actually know where you're going to end up. And part of that is being vulnerable and facing yourself and realizing what you can't do and asking for help. Well, whereas you've been through neurodiversity, and particularly if you've been through maybe a tough childhood in learning academically, it can be hard to ask for help.
I'll actually push over to Matthew with this one, which coming out of that, which is that just how important is it if we're designing for the neurodiverse, but how much of that actually just helps everybody anyway? Because if you look at things like, and thinking back to what Rachel said as well earlier about attention spans, I don't know any youngster that looks at video material these days who's got an attention span at all, regardless of whether they're neurodiverse or not. I just think that, learning how to say what you need to say quicker, or being, better at design full stop in a more inclusive way just helps everybody, does it not?
Yeah, I agree. I think one example somebody said to me the other day is like the push buttons to open doors, where that was an accessibility thing originally, and now the boot of your car is with a push button, which everybody finds easier. So I think that is important. And I remember sort of some of the design process I went through when developing my website kind of comes from my engineering background. We do it. If you're developing something as a design engineer, you benchmark what's already out in the market and you try and get a feel for how people already interact with it. And the way I sort of visualize going through a website is you want the root of least resistance. So if you're using a mobile phone, the menu buttons within a thumb reach and all that kind of thing. And I remember looking particularly for like Dyslexia Hacks, where the only thing out there at the time was a life hacker article that was huge, full of text. And it's like, well, dyslexic people aren't going to want to read this. And I think if I was a strong reader, I don't want to read this for a long time. So putting stuff on individual title cards that are short things with a bit of humor, going back to Rachel's point, humor is always really important. It keeps me engaged. I think having quick things that people can dive through, they read one, then tap into the other they want, helps with that sort of speed of user experience and just making everything a bit more friendly. And as you say, scrolling through social media, stuff comes up quickly and disappears. Like sitting down to watch a TV program or watching YouTube, I tend to find I'm watching YouTube with 15-minute videos rather than investing an hour in a TV program.
I mean, this is going live on a couple of different social platforms at the moment. So it's going live on LinkedIn. It's also going live on YouTube and Twitter, and they're all quite different in terms of their interface and their sort of interface value. Just out of interest, before we move on to the next real question that I was going to ask, which of those different platforms do you find easiest in terms of interface, and do you think that do you think that actually the way that you approach design is actually, formatted the way that you approach the different social medias?
They are different in interface, but what you have kind of found, and I think because Facebook tends to be, they're not first to market, but they're first recognized one, is that actually everything feels a little bit like the logos and symbology are slightly different. But if you jump on any social media platform, the contacts logo is that platform's version of the same logo. So that's kind of that process where it's got its own individuality on it. So if you open the LinkedIn app versus the Facebook app and put it in grayscale, you'd still know which one was which. But most of the stuff is in similar places where you expect. It's sort of, like if you drive a car, you get in most cars and you know roughly where all the switches are, even though they have a slightly different interface depending on which brand of car it is. And I think that social media platforms are like that. So they do feel very much the same. And I noticed with Instagram, where they started building more into it, they're having to change their user interface because it was getting complicated trying to find things. And you just want no resistance to any of your users to get through it.
I've got to say, though, Matthew, I have turned on the indicators when I wanted to change the wiper speed a number of times, though, because they're often on different sides of the steering wheel.
Yeah, they can be on some cars. Yeah, that's quite funny when that happens.
You're going right because your wipers slow down.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Unfortunately, the car behind you cannot see this information.
Yeah. For everybody else, is there any particular kind of content that you naturally gravitate towards on social media?
I think from a perspective of the dyslexic brain, I would say I gravitate towards stuff that maybe asks a question in the title, something that's got bullet points so it's easy to read. Particularly, if something is on video content, it's much more easier to engage than say maybe a long research, paragraph of text. So definitely something that's more multisensory. And of course, the odd rescue dog video is always lovely to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
Stuart's been doing quite a number of dog videos lately, or pictures lately. So his content's probably there for you. But there's the thing again. Ultimately, who's going to read paragraphs and paragraphs of text in this day and age? Anyway, I mean, sure, if you're going to deep dive into something outside of a platform, I think that's fine. But in terms of, introducing someone to a subject matter on something like social media, it amazes me how many people are still writing too much.
Yeah, there's a quality thing though, isn't there, as well? Like the information now is almost like a fast food information. You get these constant bombardment of messaging, but there's no real quality or depth. I mean, who reads journal articles? You know, there are a few who read them because they need to, but they're really inaccessible. They're really hard to get into, and there's usually a paywall. But the quality of information, how do you get such quality of information across without reams of text?
I think it needs to be, it's almost like a hierarchy of it. So your social media is the quick digestive bit, like, oh, that is interesting. I'll read a bit more into that. So you've got the visual social media of it, and then you might go into somebody's wrote a book that isn't the original kind of research, and they've kind of used analogies or whatever to do it. Like I read a book the other day where it uses Castaway to explain Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
And then if you're really into that, you will then dive into his research. You've kind of got that because sometimes you just want the skim knowledge of it. Like I'm kind of, and then you keep stepping through the gateways until you start to dive into the deep journal with all the academic language, if that's really what excites you. But getting there, yes, get lost for hours. But you're getting there, like watching a theory on YouTube because it's video and it suits me, will get me into it. If I'm like, wow, I really want to geek out on that, I might then go and dig into the audio book of the person who's researched it, or start reading journal articles, which is the hardest thing for me to do. But if I'm really into it, but I've already gone through sort of 3 or 4 stages before I've got there.
Yeah, so I mean, those gateways are quite a useful part of design, and I guess quite a useful part of design for the neurodiverse. I mean, actually, thinking of your poster there, Rachel, it's an if you like, an abstract from the book, which leads you to think about the book. Would that be fair to say?
It's an interesting interpretation. What happened was that I sent the book idea to a designer, and they said, "Oh, we thought it would work really well as a poster." So it wasn't actually my idea. They just thought it was a good way because you display all the information in one go rather than having to read a book. Obviously, that's more accessible to people. You can put it on a wall; they can read it wherever. They don't have to pick anything up. And I know for for some people, books are really off-putting. You don't know what's going to be in there, if it's going to be engaging or whatever. You can just scan the poster and then see, oh, is this something I'm going to read or not? And I think people have touched on this point already. You need to know if it's going to be useful or interesting for you before you dive in. And I think that's like 10 times the case for neurodiverse people as it is for a lot of other people. We hang on to things that mean something. We hang on to those things that connect to us, and everything else is just dishwater. So I think, what you've been saying about that sort of gatekeeping, sort of engaging, that you start off somewhere and maybe go deeper or not, I think really speaks to a lot of neurodiverse people, because we need to know it's going to be worth our time and worth our while to start getting into that. Because once we get into something and people with ADHD who hyper-focus know this, you're in for days, possibly.
Yeah. Unfortunately for me, it's autobiographies of musicians. My wife doesn't understand why I've got enough to support the house underneath the house, but there we go. The language of neurodiversity, that's the next thing that I want to come on to. That has been traditionally a language around disability, weakness, challenge, if we're being fair about it. But that is a language that is changing now, and it's beginning to look at the strengths of diversity and creativity. So where have you seen neurodiversity contribute positively to the design process, and through that change as that language is beginning to change as well? Maybe Deborah to lead off on this one.
Sure. I guess just anecdotally or through my own observations, I kind of see so many, great, whether they're educators or lecturers or tutors or strategy coaches who are neurodiverse themselves, and they're able to make, great curriculums or suggest great kind of processes or workflows, because they understand that experience of having difficulties with learning, and so there's a kind of, I guess, innate empathy. It's not to say that if you're not neurodiverse, you can't still do it and be great and wonderful, but I just think that there's something about having had that personal experience of having to break down your learning process and put it back together again, I guess. That means you're kind of in a good place to help someone else. And also being able to kind of, I guess, look at the outcome or the big picture. You know, what you want that person in the workplace or the learner to come out with, like what you want them to, not what you want them to be, but yeah, I guess. So you're kind of working backwards from an outcome rather than kind of in a linear way as well from the beginning in a kind of A plus B equals C. It's much more, I think, holistic in that sense. So that's why.
True.
Why I think.
Stuart, you must, with some of the things you're doing, you must work backwards.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that I've talked before about the word assistive technology, and it always bothers me. For me, assistive technology is a pair of scissors that's made for the left-handed person, you know, and inclusive technology is a pair of scissors that everyone can use. And when you're getting, you know, mainstreaming neurodiversity and just engaging, including everyone, design should cover everyone. You know, I think we should be making things that everyone can use, everyone with those needs anyway. I guess there is a more extreme level of disability and challenge, and the words that you said before, Graham, where we are talking about disability there, and we're looking at things that are more bespoke to that person's needs, because that person's needs are maybe deeper or further away from that middle of that bell curve. But talking to this group here and the people we engage with, there's not really a good argument for assistive technology in every sense. We want inclusive technology, and I'll say technology as well. We're talking here about service design, writing books, the life hacks. There's, you know, we're not just talking about software or, you know, equipment, are we? We're talking about processes and everything we interact with. There's gadgets and gizmos all around me right now, and I would say that most of them have issues from an inclusive point of view. Yeah.
I always had a problem with the term assistive technology, even when I was involved with assistive technology. I wonder how much do we hold on to these terms, and why do we hold on to them as well? When
the labels, aren't they? Labels. I mean, the label of dyslexia, or I'm dyslexic, could be used as the superpower. Now, these days the language is changing. I think children are saying, "No, I've got dyslexia, yeah, but I'm really good at this." And yeah, I might be a bit slower at reading, but I think that wasn't the case. It hasn't always been the case, but I can't speak from personal experience there.
Yeah. Rachel, how about for you? I mean, how important is it that the language changes and actually we start to drop some of these words maybe?
Yeah, it's crucial for my job, because that's how I sell my services, because people, it's true that sometimes people say, you know, oh, we want to be nice to the autistics, and so we'll do an inclusion thing, here's some money. I'm like, it's not about that. It's about the fact that all neurodiverse people have strengths. We're the only marginalized group who have demonstrable additional skills and talents that go above and beyond those of our peers. So it's just a business thing to be inclusive towards us. And you were asking about some of the benefits that neurodiverse people bring in design teams. And I'm not dyslexic, but I work with a lot of dyslexic people. I'm in fact hyperlexic. Because I'm autistic, I'm all about the details and the words and everything. So I'm sort of the opposite of dyslexic. And it means when I work with a dyslexic, we come from two different approaches. And that means we can do so much great work together. And one thing I learned from working with dyslexics is how important visual imagery is. So here I've got a cup of tea from the Chinese supermarket. And if I wrote this down, and so if I said, I want you to get me this tea, it's peach oolong, if anyone's interested. If I wrote that down, or if I wrote this down here, you would have trouble finding that amongst all the row of cups, unless you are a native Chinese speaker, Mandarin or Cantonese. And even if I said to you, get the Lu Jiao Xiang, you're gonna have difficulty finding that. If I said it's the one with the deer on and it's pink, you're there straight away. And that works. It's just speaking to what Matthew said, you do something for a dyslexic person, but it's easier for everyone. So you've not got your partner hunting around the aisles of the Chinese supermarket. They just go to the pink one with the deer. And that's something that I've learned from as a big dyslexic strength there. And I wonder if you don't mind me sharing my screen, I've got something else.
No, absolutely not. Yep.
Which I learned from, this is something else I learned from dyslexic people. I'm just gonna.
There we go. We're seeing that.
So this is a slide from my talk on autism in women. And it was talking about the diagnostic gap. Now, if I told you that 0.2% of women are diagnosed autistic and 1.8% of men are, you're like, what? You're not going to remember that. You can see on a graph that the gap is big, and that visual information, which dyslexics taught me how to present this. That's so much stronger. And then I went on in the talk to talk about how, if you look, this graph was generated from the same information as the previous one, but it's as a percentage of the population. So you have 100% of men in this column, and you've got a little sliver of yellow at the bottom showing how many are autistic. And then with the women's column, there are so few women diagnosed with autism that you can't actually see it on the graph. And that demonstrates how autistic women are practically invisible. So it makes a really strong point through data visualization. And that was something that I was taught by, sorry, I'm just finding my window again. That's something that I was taught by dyslexic people, because I was all about words. I never thought about pictures. I never thought about how best to present information that it would have an impact. So before I'd sit there with my numbers and my figures and going, yes, autism is underdiagnosed in women. But now I've got these graphs and I can make the point and I can say, look, autistic women are invisible. What we're going to do about it? And then people actually pay attention. I don't have to get my Dalek out.
That's brilliant. I remember when I used to do a lot of workplace assessments in large bank buildings, and I readily said to them on numerous occasions, you do realize that actually people would be able to find where they're going a lot better if you actually use color. Because it was like every floor looked exactly the same, and I got lost in those buildings trying to find people in those buildings, because you'd pop up on another floor and you'd look out and you go, it looks exactly the same as the floor below. And when you've got 15 of them, and all it would need is a different color carpet or a stripe on the wall, and the odd building did, and it made such a big difference. Nicola, any experiences in terms of how design has been really influenced by neurodiversity?
I actually want to come back to your previous questions about the use of the term, in terms of dyslexia and stuff. So what I wanted to say on that is that I think when you're diagnosed with dyslexia at school, particularly when people generally their value around you is externalized by their grades. When you get diagnosed, you get a sense of, oh, I understand maybe why I'm not achieving the grades in these subjects, but you also can associate it with something and relief, but also a sense of I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as somebody that can get A's. And my experience at school was, it was, a lot of the testing and a lot of the grades were based on very linear subjects, just displaying your intellect through writing an essay, rather than displaying your intellect by your creative thoughts, your ability to speak, or ability to draw a picture. Or if you did have art, it was very seldom part of your lot. It was 1 grade out of 9, for example. So I think this whole change in terms of seeing people that are coming out, particularly in the mainstream, who've achieved a lot, but have different neurodiverse profiles. So maybe they're autistic, maybe they're, dyslexic. But what happens is someone can look to someone and go, actually, is my identification with my diagnosis correct? Because actually I'm seeing somebody who's actually, being told that they're excellent, they've achieved all these different things, whether it's creating a beautiful work of art, whether it's writing music, whether it's running a business. And I think this whole push towards strengths actually gets people to challenge their internal dialogue about how they are talking to themselves about the diagnosis. I know that when I got diagnosed, which was more towards sort of the middle of university, I got a sense of relief, and I also got a sense that I wasn't good enough as well. And I was always externally comparing myself to my brother, who found academia very easy. But what made the biggest difference is when I got the support training, and rather than just read again, suddenly I got strategies that were making me learn in the way that I learn and aligned with how I learn, which means I got to the outcome much quicker. And what that led to is, rather than me seeing the world as against me, I started to see the world for me. And then I started to see the world as an opportunity, and I started to work towards my strengths, as I talked about earlier, in terms of recognizing what you're good at and recognizing where you need help. And so I think this whole movement, you know, as Stuart was talking about, you know, kids identifying, actually, I'm good at this, but not so good at this, but that's okay. And I think it's important that the world embraces the spectrum of intelligence, because there is so many different types of intelligence and so many different ways of learning. Someone can be very kinesthetic, someone can be very visual. As Rachel's talked about, you know, she might be very good with words, and then she's working with dyslexia who bring in a creative flow, influence how she does stuff, as I find with when I work with people that are on the spectrum, for example. And so it just shows you that a cohesive team made up of all of these different attributes actually makes the world go round. I mean, in Lexic, for example, you have lots of people that are neurodiverse, lots of people that aren't neurodiverse, but it actually makes us better, because we're bringing in lots of different people with lots of different talents, and that influences what we can do, because it amalgamates different strengths, whether it be detail, whether it be ideas, maybe it be reflecting, maybe it be speaking. And so I think this whole spin and positivity on the neurodiversity, the awareness piece, particularly, you know, from setting up Lexic 15 years ago to now, it's becoming much more mainstream. So I think that that's a really healthy thing, because I think the parent with the child that now has a neurodiverse profile isn't saying, focusing on what they can't do, they're starting to focus on what they can do, as well as something that they, some skills they might need to develop, which as far as I can see is the same for everybody. But it might not be reading, it might be they need to get better at sport, or they need to get better at art, or whatever. But I think that's a really healthy thing that's happening.
It kind of goes back to what I was saying in my post this morning, which and the point that I was kind of making about, I was talking about video content, but the point I was making is that I think that inherently a lot of people are still far too selfish in their own view of the world. And ultimately we do need to look outwards, because even if you take a platform like LinkedIn, you can sit there and go, well, I don't like that, that, and that on it. But actually you're not thinking necessarily about what other people that are on that platform might like. And I was raising the point that, but some of those people that are on that platform may be the people you want to talk to. And the reason they might be there is because those other things are there that aren't the things that you like, or aren't the things that, you know, in terms of content or source, that you would be attracted to. So, I mean, do you want to pick up on that a little bit, Matthew? I mean, how important is that we start to look outwards more as a society in terms of design?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I went to school in the 90s and got statemented, as I said, at 6 years old. So I had all the supportive stuff all the way through, and it has evolved. I didn't go to uni till my mid-20s and was amazed how much that had changed. But actually, it's getting rid of some of the self-limiting beliefs. You know, I could never work out at school why I was in the lowest class for English and then one of the highest class for science, and my friends could write big essays and I couldn't, and all this kind of things. And actually, it's not been till very recently that I've started shaking some of them off. Like through midway through uni, I'm like 30, and it's like, I'm still here. I thought I was going to fall out. This is where clever people go, and I'm not one of them. But apparently, I am. So, getting that out of the way, I think, helps, and also having a diverse team. I work as an engineer, and I could list quite a lot of famous engineers who are neurodiverse. But even stuff with having a diverse team of people who think differently, I tend to float designs in CAD screen, but also in front of my head. And then we go into a design review with 4 or 5 of us in, and somebody will always spot something the other person hasn't. And that's kind of what you want, the different thinking in terms of improving design, because I think I've optimized it, or somebody else thinks they've optimized the design exactly what you want. And somebody goes, have you thought of doing X? Oh, no, I haven't, but that's a really good idea. And that's kind of where you want the process to go, rather than being individuals of getting too sort of married to your own design. But I think the language change is brilliant. Having the power of dyslexia, and actually that makes me more want to talk about it and help other people with it, or I'm more honest at work about it. So I realize sometimes when I've got something on a CAD screen, I don't need as much on there because I can visualize the bits in the middle, but I will sort of stop and like, I think this way, and I appreciate you might not. So tell me if I'm running off and you haven't quite got it in your head yet. So it kind of works quite well that way.
I didn't put this question in, but I'm going to, which is that it's quite interesting that I think in modern times, we've actually seen the beginnings of a cultural shift in terms of management structure and style as well. And I think that to some extent is aligning with this better understanding about neurodiversity as well, in that the traditional hierarchical structure of I've got the ideas at the top and you have to follow this and you have to follow this, and moving more towards team and shared objectives, etc., really helps the neurodiverse be integrated into the whole process. How important is that, do you feel? Anyone want to take the start on that?
I think Matthew was just getting towards that element of openness. I think that's the key, isn't it? If you work it, we're all talking about team. Nicola was mentioning teamwork, Rachel and Deborah as well. It's about, Deborah was talking about the designer's intent versus the user's expectation, and how they might not always be the same thing. Matthew's talking about just openness and that being comfortable to say, look, this is how I think, this is how I learn, these are my strengths and weaknesses. But if everyone at the table can do the same thing, regardless of rank and hierarchy and tradition, can, as you said, Graham, have an objective in mind. This is the problem we're trying to solve. Let's solve it. You can really go far, regardless of your learning needs, or because of your learning needs, perhaps.
Yeah. Rachel, any comments on that?
On what? Sorry.
Yeah, in terms of
autistic, I work better with like what they call semantic prompting, which is a very clear question.
No, that's fine. In terms of where management structure seems to be going as well, more towards a team-based structure as opposed to a hierarchical structure. Do you think that's an important move culturally?
Yeah. I see, when I talk to all kinds of companies. I talk to little ones, I talk to entrepreneurs, and then I talk to big corporates as well. And what I'm seeing more of is much more of a movement to the sort of holistic approach. So seeing the people who come to work for you as actual people, rather than just drones or someone who's there to do a job. And they understand now you've got to look after people's well-being. You've got to help them to be their best self, because things like flexible working or having inclusive technology or whatever it might be, all those things help people to be more productive. And again, like I said at the beginning, this is a business decision. It's nice to be what I call fluffy, but ultimately, you can't be fluffy if it's going to cost you more than you get. But all the studies on things like inclusive recruitment for neurodiverse people and professional development for neurodiverse people, all of those show an economic benefit when you're inclusive, regardless of if you invest in training or whatever it is you might do. You always get more out than you put in, basically, which is really good. And I heard the term job carving the other day from a recruiter. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with that. She said job carving, and I didn't know if she was saying carving like you carve a roast or carving like a cow has a calf, which was really confusing to me, because and she meant carving like carving a roast, and it's where you shape the job to the person. And I think we're seeing a little bit more of that. And I said to her, that's a great idea. It's brilliant for neurodiverse people. If you're dyslexic and it says on the thing, good communication skills, and it makes you panic and you don't apply. What if, you need to be able to talk, but if your writing's not that good, that's cool. You get the autistic to do it maybe instead. And I said to her, aren't people going to see that as like skiving a bit, not coming in and saying, I'm not doing that and I'm not doing that? It's a little bit, could even be perceived as a little bit diva-ish. And she said no, because, well, for one thing, you're taking on other people's roles. I've talked about how I rely on dyslexic people in particular to help me with the visual stuff, the data visualization and the pictures and things like that. But also, she says that happens anyway. If you get a job 6 months down the line, you're not doing exactly what your job description said. You're kind of not doing a bit that you're really not that good at, but you're taking on other people's, maybe some tasks from other people. And I think we've all done that. If any one of you just threw something on my desk and said, can you proofread that? I'm not going to go, it's not my job, because, that's not how we work as a team, is it? No, I proofread it. And then I say, I'm rubbish with things like this. Can you draw me some pictures, or can you visualize me something like this? And we all do it. And I think that's one way we could move towards even better team working, by just embracing this whole job carving thing, carving like a roast, not having a cow. Because I think that enables us to work to all of our strengths.
Oh, absolutely. And isn't it why we've just seen in so many businesses before now, such big turnover of staff is because actually, someone sits there and goes, well, I think we ought to have a marketing team. Let's just employ some people to come in and do marketing. And then it just doesn't fit in with their idea of what marketing is.
Certain shaped peg in another shaped hole.
Absolutely.
And when the peg changes shape all the time, it becomes even harder, doesn't it, to meet the business need, if the need is a list of bullet points in terms of these are the things that you are here to do. Do not do the others.
Absolutely. I saw Nicola and Deborah both nodding in agreement all the way through that. So which one of you would like to comment? Deborah?
I guess I just had a thought about that job carving, which I've heard about, but I don't know that much about. But I guess in order to be able to kind of job carve, and I love the kind of image of the was it roast lamb or beef or something? I'm not sure, but is that you kind of got to be in quite a privileged position in the first place in order to be able to be given that opportunity to carve your job, which obviously is fantastic and has obvious benefits. But I wonder in reality, on the ground, how many people are able to do that. I mean, I'm sure we can all kind of talk about, I think Nicola touched on, having experiences of having to fit in and kind of all that sort of pain, and that we've had before in terms of being kind of shoehorned into a role or into a kind of linear process that you might have, even as someone that's a dyslexic myself as well, you might have adjustments, but the adjustments are just about trying to make you fit into something else. Whereas obviously the ideal is to create your own role and to to job carve in that way. But yeah, no, they were just initial kind of thoughts I had from that kind of theme, which is
It's understanding the value you add, isn't it? Understanding the value you add and having that reaffirmed sometimes is helpful.
Yeah, and I think also the thing about, the discussion around strengths is really important, as everyone said, for young people, because I think, 20 years ago, there's no way I would have been in the position I am now to say, well, this is who I am, this is how I learn, and that's okay, and that's really good, and if you don't like it, then, off somewhere, that just wouldn't have come to me. It wouldn't have been part of who I was.
I was going to ask Nicola, surely there's quite a lot of upskilling that's required there, both in terms of management and people's own skills in terms of being able to identify for themselves what they need.
I mean,
or who they really are.
I think it's like, you have the sort of following on from what Rachel and Deborah have said. It's a case of, you might be able to say job carve and say, okay, we understand we want a coder. We understand that these are the key skills that we want. But the next piece, which we were discussing with an engineering company yesterday, is the progression. And, when you get to someone who is neurodiverse and they're a senior engineer, for example, they might be very on the spectrum. Why does that person have to be able to line manage when they are so excellent at this one specific, area, niche area? Because very often that can attract, a certain brain type. And so I think we were talking about, not only how you shape the job to the person, but also allowing fluidity in, classic linear progression systems. So classically, if someone's on the shop floor, there might be a team leader, but it's very kinesthetic. The next role is very paper-based, which a dyslexic person might find hard. The role above that could be very strategic, which may align to their strengths again. So it's looking at also sort of the progression piece and the talent piece and being more fluid, I think, in terms of how people are recruiting. Because when you look at a lot of the assessment centre pieces, that's been around for a while, and some people are still using the same classic assessment centre pieces. And you're like, well, if you've got someone who's got their own paradigm and they're judging the autistic person in front of them who's a coder that may be quite shy, they might go, oh, they can't take the job because they're not, going socializing for lunch, for example. But actually, the key skill is the coding skill, and that's the skill that the company really needs. So it's really important that the recruitment process is designed for the person. The progression and talent process also is more fluid, and that the person who's actually interviewing them has the awareness. It's coming back to your question. It's the awareness piece. It's making sure that I am not putting my own paradigm and judgment onto that person, saying this is how you should be. and actually recognizing that people are different and people express themselves differently. It should really be about what is the primary competency that role needs. So there is a blend of things, you know, in terms of education. There's also a sort of a, you know, we're doing sort of a more sort of neurodiversity sort of systems change, where we're consulting more from an OD perspective. And I think that, you know, it's great to see organisations that 10 years ago would not be asking this question at all, which is a really refreshing thing.
You've got a lot of love for Modessa there.
Yay.
For that. but yeah, I've seen it so many times. I mean, one occasion that sticks out was I went to see a guy that worked for a rail company, and had grown up on the railways, working on the lines, had got himself into senior management. His job until very recently meant that he was always hands-on on the lines, looking at problems, you know, with a team of people near the lines, working out, visualizing what might be going wrong, and verbally giving instruction to get that to work. Suddenly they decided to promote him, and his role changed to writing reports and he was dyslexic. And it just just didn't work. So understanding, as you say, and getting into that whole area now of saying it's not just when you start work and the induction piece and everything else, but being able to follow that through and allow the fluidity of that to go through so that that person can progress, but in a way where it's just not going to, they're suddenly going to hit a brick wall, is really important. Matthew, I'm going to give you final word for the day on that, I think.
It reminds me of a story one of my university lecturers told us about the progression. Apparently Bell Labs and a couple of American companies have changed it. So technical jobs can promote to higher technicals. And his example was you'd employ Sheldon Cooper for what Sheldon Cooper's really good at from the Big Bang Theory. However, you'd never want to promote him to manager, but at some point he's want to go up in seniority. So you just keep pumping him into the higher level jobs. They have a sort of a side-by-side structure rather than what quite a lot of British companies do, which is you get to so point and then go into management, and then that may not suit your particular world of skills. But I always like the visualization of trying to get Sheldon Cooper into management would not work at all.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining in this discussion today. It's been a marvelous discussion, and hopefully people will pick up and see this throughout the next week or so as it goes round, as it does on social media. And if there's any further comments, I will let everybody know. But thanks everybody for joining in this discussion today.
Thank
you.
Graham.
Thanks for your time. Bye for now.
See ya.